Hi everyone, I'm Jane, and today we are going to paint these glowing magical mushrooms. Before we get started, make sure that you check out the video description below for a full list of materials, as well as a link to where you can get a set of my paintbrushes and a link to where you can sign up for my mailing list on my website so that you can get my list of 101 ways that you can immediately improve your painting skills. Now let's get started. Okay, today I'm using a Fredrix Red Label canvas in 16 by 20, but you can use any size or shape canvas that you like. And over here I have my palette, my same standard palette that I always use, with the addition today of Phthalo Blue. So you don't have to use Phthalo Blue if you don't have it, but I feel like it really helped me get the glow that I was going for in this painting. Now, as always, you will see these colors, except Phthalo Blue, on my palette each week. It doesn't mean I'm going to be using all of these colors. So aside from Phthalo Blue, this week I'll be using these colors. Now, today's painting is going to be based off of this image. I'm going to make some changes to it clearly. And I actually feel like it's going to be easier for me to get the dark background that I want to get by starting off with a black base. So you can use a black canvas if you like. I'm actually going to be using black gesso. You can use black paint, whatever you have, whatever you like. So let's take this canvas from white to black. All right, so here's my reference image, and I've got it on my phone here in front of me. And I'm gonna start with the background. And I'm gonna do the background to almost completion before I start the mushrooms. And I know that that's kind of different to how I usually do it, but it just felt like the best way to get this image to work out for me. Now I'm going to change it a little bit. I am not going to do the moon because I feel like the moon is, the composition of it is really awkward. I feel like it takes away from the mushrooms. It feels completely unnecessary to me, and it feels like it's competing with the bright bits of the mushrooms. If you want to do the moon, go for it. Those are the reasons that I'm not going to do it. I'm also going to simplify the greenery. I feel like the tall standy-uppy bits around the mushrooms are distracting and unnecessary, so I'm going to leave those off as well. I really just want this painting to primarily be the mushrooms, and that's about it. But I am going to build the layers in the background, and so to do that I'm going to use my number 12 filbert. You can use any brush you like. If you're still using my my 1-inch from my old line of brushes, you can absolutely use that too. The brush doesn't matter. What matters is how confident you are using your brush. And today I do not have a palette for the side for my matte medium, so I am gonna have to put my matte medium on my palette, which I don't usually like to do. It just gets really messy. So the reason I'm starting with a black canvas is because a lot of times blues are very transparent, and that works out for me in this. If I'm trying to layer these blues on a white canvas, my background's going to be very, very bright, and I'm going to have to bring in black or something to darken it down. I don't want to do that. So that's why we're using a black canvas. Now I am going to start with just ultramarine. I'm really not going to be using my phthalo blue until we get to the mushrooms, and I'll tell you all about that when we get there. So ultramarine, I might grab just a hint of cerulean, simply because cerulean is a little bit more opaque, but I still want this to be very transparent. I'm even going to get some matte medium. Again, just nice and transparent. Over here to our canvas, I'm just going to start at the bottom, just really messy. See that? I'm not trying to cover all of the black. In the first place, this ultramarine is really transparent. So even if I cover all of the black, once this dries, it's not going to be that light or vivid. It's probably not going to look like there's a lot going on there. So don't worry about trying to get full coverage of this blue right now. Also, One of the main reasons I'm not worrying about getting full coverage is because it's going to help build a little bit of texture. The background of our reference image, there's a lot of texture, there's a lot of shapes. It's not a smooth gradiated background. And if I try and, focus on covering too much, the background's going to be very, very smooth, and it's not going to look like a background full of other elements and bokeh lights. Now there, I just pretty much grabbed cerulean. There's still ultramarine in that mixture, and I'm still using a good amount of matte medium. I took this ultramarine just below the halfway point of the canvas, and now I'm going to start with my cerulean mixture. Just doing the same thing, but I am taking it down a little into the ultramarine. Sometimes when we do things like this, where I've got the different colors, I'll see where it looks like people really stopped, and there's a hard line between this color and the next. Please don't be afraid. Get that color down there, Hard lines instead of a transition are much more jarring to look at. I know sometimes, especially if you're newer to painting, it can feel strange or you don't feel confident, taking a color over top of something you've already painted. Please just do it. Now I'm sticking with that cerulean. Again, there's a hint of ultramarine in there, but I'm really just picking up cerulean. And I'm going to come in here, I'm going to grab the tiniest point. See that? The tiniest point, sorry, there's a glare on my paint. And I'm going to mix that in there. It's really, let's see, it didn't change it a whole lot, but just the flavor of that blue is ever so slightly more green. So same thing, I'm going to get that up here and down into this one. Don't be afraid to scribble. I know some of us are afraid of scribbling because, as a kid, you're told, don't scribble. Don't scribble in your coloring books. Please scribble. Scribbling is the thing that does the thing sometimes. It's the thing you want. So please scribble. Let this background be just messy and fun and a way for you to just kind of cut loose. See? Nothing real specific or tidy. I'm going to let this dry completely, and then we're going to come back and work on some more layers. All right, so here my paint is dry, and as you can see, it dried a lot darker and allows a lot more of that black to come through than it looked when it was wet. So I know that right off the bat, that can be confusing if you're just kind of starting out and you see it's a really intense blue and now suddenly it's very dark. That's exactly what I wanted to happen here. So if yours is very, very dark like this, you're on the right track. If it's very, very bright still, don't worry about that. Some paint colors are a little more opaque. Like I used Golden Cerulean Blue, but I believe the Liquitex Cerulean Blue is a little bit more opaque. So if yours shows a little bit more, just use more medium in your next layer. And don't worry about it, because we'll do a few layers and it's going to get brighter and then it's going to get darker again. So you're on the right track. All right, now I'm going to go to my number 8 Filbert, because we're going to start doing some of the bokeh lights. But to start, I'm going to use my number 8. It doesn't matter, whatever size you think is going to work out. So I'm going to start with some ultramarine, and I think I'll put a little bit of yellow in it. Not a lot, I just want to kind of change the temperature a bit, get a color that's on the green side. They don't make a nice bright vivid green, and that's okay. Now this cad yellow is a little bit opaque, so that's going to make this color show up a little bit more. So let's see, so you can see it. Sorry about that glare. Right about there, it's just kind of this grayish green. I'm going to get a little bit of medium. All right, don't be too stressed out about bokeh lights. It's pretty easy. Basically, zoom you in there. I'm going to push my brush flat and then just kind of spin it a little bit. And I don't want those hard edges, so I'm just going to go around the edge. You can even do it with your finger if you want. Just get rid of the hard edge. Now I know somebody's going to ask, can I use stampers, those little sponge? You're more than welcome to do that. Personally, I like the much more organic and natural look of doing it this way. They're not as uniform. They don't look, rubber stamped, whatever. I like it this way, but you can do whatever you like the best. And I'm just gonna keep going. I haven't picked up any more paint. I'm gonna keep going with this color until I'm really not getting anything else. Get some of them on the edge that are only like little halfsies. Don't be afraid of getting them too close to each other. They can touch. In fact, they should. If you get these so they're all like 6 to 8 inches separated from each other, then it's gonna look a little weird. They're gonna look too even. So don't pay attention to where the other ones are as you're putting more on. Don't worry about where your mushrooms are gonna be. Just kind of enjoy this. There's some little ones down there. See, they don't all need to be fully formed. We're just looking for some texture. I'm going to pull a little more ultramarine into there. A little more medium. Maybe I'll pull a hint of cerulean in there. I'm just looking for a color that's a bit different. Let's overlap. They can definitely overlap. Smaller, off the edge. Just spend some time here enjoying what you're doing, just playing with the shapes, playing with the colors. Don't go too vibrant at this point. None of the Bokeh Lights in our reference image are terribly bright, but at this point, this is going to be our most distant ones, and if they're too bright, it's going to be hard to knock them back later. They're going to take way too much attention. So I definitely, let me see if I can put something under here so that you can see that. I don't know why there's such a bad glare on there today. That's a little bit better. Just pulling a bit of cerulean into there, just again looking for different colors. Don't add white at this point. It's going to make them way too bright. See, that's way too bright. Way too bright. But I can wipe it out. It's got medium in it, so I know it's going to dry a little bit. It's going to dry a little bit darker. I'm going to do some other layers. And even though that's too bright, I'm just going to add a couple here and there in that same color, so that it doesn't feel out of place. If I stop with that one, I'm gonna have this one Bokeh Light that's really too bright and just way too much. So I'll add a few more because I can cover them up later. I'm always looking for ways while I'm painting to kind of find a bit of a meditative space. You know, I don't want painting to be a stressful experience, an over-the-top experience where every brush stroke is fretted over and every brush stroke is thought about way too much or judged or whatever. I like to be able to get in and just kind of, find my little place where I can just be mindful, observe the process, and just not judge it. And that's kind of what I want to do right here with these little circles. So if any of you practice mindfulness, meditation, things like that, I think that this is a really good place where you can kind of practice that as well. Notice I'm not getting a lot of the bokeh lights down here. In our image, it's a little darker down in this area. I will put some, but I just don't want to go crazy with them there. Make sure you stand back every little bit just to make sure that they're evenly distributed, that you like the way it's looking. Maybe I will put in a few that are just a little bit more yellow. But with these ones that are a little bit more yellow, I am going to make them quite transparent because I don't want them to be too bright. It's a good amount of medium. Nice and transparent. I definitely have more of the brighter colors going on up here than over here. And that's kind of how it is in the reference image, but also the reference image has a moon up here, which is definitely casting a light source onto our mushrooms, and I'm not going to do the moon. So I like the idea of the bokeh being a little bit stronger and brighter up in this area to kind of compensate for the fact that I don't have a moon in mine. The bokeh is less distinct than a moon. It's not another object, it's part of the background. So I think that it can do the job of the light source without taking too much attention away like the moon does. I think that that's good for now. I'm going to let this dry and then we'll come back. Well, maybe I'll just put a couple more down here, just some really pale ones. Most of these are going to be covered up at least a little bit down in this area. Just some suggestions of ones. See, this is why I don't like to use the stampers. If I was just using one stamper, I wouldn't be able to get all of these different variations. So that's why I prefer to use the brush. But okay, I'm gonna let it dry now, and then we'll come back and continue with our layers. All right, all of our little bokeh lights are dry and we can continue. So I'm gonna stick with my number 12 here for the background area. And I need a little more matte medium. Trying to keep my matte medium area tidy. I'm going to get a bit of sap green just to mix things up a bit. Throw a little ultramarine in there. And some medium. Mix it in. Again, the medium is making that color transparent, and we are just not going to escape these horrific glares today. Man, I'm sorry, guys. All right, that's a little bit better. It's kind of bouncy for me, but as long as you can see, I guess that's fine. Okay, so a little sap green, a little ultramarine blue, a little medium. And we're gonna come back over here and start at the bottom again. That's a little transparent. Let's throw a bit more paint into there. Make this a bit less transparent. Again, I'm not trying to cover everything. Just kind of scumbling it on there. Absolutely covering some of those bokeh lights. Just breaking up some lines. Let's get a bit more ultramarine and kind of mix it off to the side here. See that one that was a little too bright? It's kicked back a bit now. So as I work up, my color is just getting a little bit bluer here. I'm going to take this little bit darker blue with the ultramarine up over here. And in this corner where I feel like it's a little brighter, we'll start mixing a bit of cerulean in. A little bit more medium just because, again, the cerulean is a bit more opaque. Get it down into here. For sure not covering everything. Cerulean, a little bit of medium. Let's keep a hint, just a flavor of that green in there. See, I'm using my brush on the edge, see how it's kind of deformed? It just helps give, I feel like, a little bit more of an organic type look. Don't be afraid to scrub with your brushes, especially if you're using my brushes. That's what they want to do. I'm really, really loving this background so far. I feel like it's really starting to get some good depth. I'm going to get a bit more of this ultramarine. I didn't clean off my brush. I'm not picking up more medium. I just want to be kind of spotty with it. The ultramarine is going to dry really dark. It's going to be really pretty. It's going to give a really nice deep shadow color. So don't be afraid of getting too much ultramarine. It's not opaque, so it's not going to cover everything under it too much. It's going to dry really transparent and just give really beautiful glowy shadows. So I'm just dropping it in a few places here. Especially if you have maybe a bokeh that's a little bit intense, just glaze a bit of the color over it. Okay, I think that's good. I'm gonna let this dry again, and then we'll come back and just do a little bit more. All right, let's do a few more bokeh lights. And so I'm back to my number 8. Just get some of this medium. Let's get some cerulean. I'm going to start working ever so slightly lighter. So I am going to add a little bit of white. Even some of this, the Titan Violet might be good, but I'm just going to use white for now. Let's just see. But still medium. I don't want it to be too opaque. Let's get a few going on in here. I still want to soften the edges. Just a bit. Keep all of them different sizes. Let some of them be less distinct, maybe not even fully formed. I definitely like to overlap them. So when I see one in the background, maybe I'll overlap it a bit. Still just keep at least some of those edges soft. The different sizes are really being made now based on how hard I'm pressing on my brush. If I put full pressure on my brush, I get a much larger spiral. And if I press very gently, just with the tip of the brush, I get a much smaller one. Let's do another small one right there, maybe. You can use a smaller brush to get smaller shapes, and I am going to go to a smaller brush. Well, maybe, I don't know, we'll see. I have no idea what I'm doing. Let's just get a few down here. Now that this paint is really wearing off, I have very little paint left on my brush. I'll just get a few that are really, really suggested down here. Again, they look much more opaque right now because they're wet, but it's gonna dry much more transparent. A little more. Let's grab some of this yellow and mix that in just to change the temperature a little bit. Just remember where you want it to be brighter, and I want this top corner to be a little bit brighter. But that doesn't mean you don't want to have like a hard line. Everything up here is nice and bright and then it stops. Bring some of it down a little bit. It's just that the concentration of the brighter ones will be up here. It doesn't mean that none of those brighter ones are going to exist, that they don't exist down here, for example. They do. It's just that most of them will be up in this area. I loved paint bocalides. I think that it's a really great way to add some depth and interest, and it just makes everything feel so magical. And I like that. Definitely a few more in this area. I know, because I've planned out this painting, I know that from about just above center down, I am going to do a lot of dark glazing. So if some of these are too bright, it's not a big deal. I mean, I don't want to go crazy and really give myself, a lot of work to do to make sure that they're not too prominent, but I also don't want it to be a big, black, uninteresting space. So we'll just get a bit of that in here. And then let's pull a bit more yellow. In fact, I'm just going to mix right there into that. Maybe just the tiniest speck of white, just a tiny bit. And medium, nice and transparent still. All of your lights should be very, very transparent. Let's get some brighter ones in here. I like this yellow. These yellow ones, I feel like they're much brighter, they're much more saturated in color, so they feel a little bit closer to me, so I'm not going to make them as big. Plus also, because they're so bright, if they're really big, they're gonna feel like very strong light sources. They're gonna feel like they're just gonna be way stronger than I want to deal with. So if you need to go down to a smaller brush, feel free to do it. I'm just barely putting pressure on the tip of my brush. Just sometimes the spiral ends with a weird brush end. Just wipe it with your finger. Don't keep going over it with your brush. You'll just be adding more and more. We'll just suggest a few of those brighter ones down to this area, keeping the majority of them though up here. Just make sure that you stand back and look at it. If it feels, you know, unbalanced or clumpy or whatever, make sure you make changes to that. I think we're getting close. Just a few down here. This paint is so transparent, so thin. I know it's gonna look like I've got way too much of this yellow, but again, I know that I'm gonna do a lot of glazing with some really dark colors here, and all of this is gonna be kicked into the distance, so it's okay. Maybe I'll even just change the temperature a bit so that yellow doesn't feel jarring in an area that I want to be very dark. Just roll a little bit of that paint off. All right. I feel like that's probably good. I'm gonna let this dry one more time because I'm gonna do one more kind of a glazing layer. I don't know if it's necessarily a true glaze, but I'm gonna do one more little glazing layer. Then we are ready to start on our mushrooms. All right, I think this is the last layer before we start the mushrooms. So I'm gonna start again with this kind of green and ultramarine, just a bit of medium. We'll start down here. Just cover what you feel like needs to be toned down or changed in some way. You don't need to cover everything. Do it however you like. I am using the transparent colors still. Just so you knock some of that back. I love to scrub this bluish color over some of these because they're definitely still there, but just they're changed. They get a little bit more life to them. I think right now, as is, they look kind of plopped on top because they are, but just a bit of this color glazed over them just kind of assimilates everything together. Brings everything into the same scene rather than just looking like, you know, stamps on top. A little more. Now, when you're layering like this, when you're doing this process, please remember that there's no like magical number of layers. If you feel like it needs more layers on your painting to get it to look the way you want it to look, then by all means, do as many layers as you need. You don't have to do as many layers as I'm doing. You do what you need to do to get the look that you want. I'm gonna go more, I grabbed a lot of ultramarine there. I don't want quite that much. But more ultramarine. Just in a few areas. Keeping it nice and thin so it can be seen through. That's the point of a glaze. It's not a glaze if it obliterates everything. And I might even mix a hint of cerulean in there with some medium. Just a few areas. I love how that cerulean brightens things up a little bit. But it also kind of pushes things, the bokeh lights a little deeper into the background because it does cover them a little bit more. It's a little more opaque. Oh, I really like that. I'm just going to get a suggestion of this cerulean bit over here. Okay. I am pretty happy with this background for now. I'm going to let it dry. And then we're ready to start on our mushrooms. All right, our canvas is dry. I've let it dry for about an hour. I would recommend, if you're able, to let it dry for a little bit longer, about a day, if you're going to be using chalk. I'm going to be using chalk next. If you feel like you can do it without chalk, that's fine. The reason you want to make sure that it's very, very dry is because if it's still a little tacky, like, it's not too bad. You know, sometimes you can touch and then, yeah, hear that sound? So it's still a little sticky, even though it's completely dry to the touch. It just makes it really hard and sometimes impossible to clean chalk off when it's like that. But I don't have the luxury of time right now, so I'm gonna have to just hope that I let it dry long enough. So this is just a chalk pencil. Actually, this is a white watercolor pencil, so cross your fingers. And I have my ruler. Now on my reference image here, you can see that I've got it cut into quarters. And that's really, it's not to, you know, force you into gridding your image. It's so that I know where the center of my canvas is so that I can make sure that my composition is nice. That's why I'm gonna do this. If you feel like you're comfortable not doing this, feel free to skip it. But I'm just loosely going to break this into halves, and it doesn't have to be real exact. Okay, so I very, very faintly drew my halfway marks on my canvas here. If you can't see it, it's not a big deal. You just want to make sure that you can see it. So draw it on there as faintly as you can. And now let's draw our mushrooms on here. So the first thing I'm going to do is kind of look at my reference image and decide where is the top of my shapes. Like where is the outside edges of my shapes? I'm not going to just start drawing a mushroom. So the top of this mushroom is roughly center. So I'm just going to make a mark there. How far is it from the edge and where about is that? Let's say right about there. So they're just little like half-inch marks. We're not going to get too crazy specific right now. And of course, my mushrooms are going to end up being laid out a little bit different than the image. But that's because I'm not a Xerox machine. I'm not a photocopier. I am an artist, so I'm free to interpret these mushrooms however I like and make changes to them however I like. All right, where did they connect up? Well, let's get the ground on here first. I can see that ground is roughly about like that. This mushroom here, the stem is roughly there. This mushroom here, the stem comes through just off center and it connects up pretty close to the center there. So I've just kind of marked out the little spots. Now I can start drawing my mushrooms, still very faintly. Kind of comes in here. You may not be able to see my drawing, and that's okay. If I make this drawing too vivid, if I make the white too distinct, it might be really hard for me to clean off later. So, and same for you. Don't get in there and go too crazy with your pencil lines, no matter what you're using. If you're using a chalk pencil or a piece of chalk or a lead pencil, whatever you're using. I'm going to bring that up a little bit higher. And I know a lot of you want to trace. If you want to trace, you're free to print out the reference image and trace it onto your canvas. Personally, I am more interested in, training myself to draw, to see my subjects and to be able to draw them. So that's what I want to do. And it takes a lot of time and energy to make tracing elements. And if I'm not going to be tracing, then I don't want to take the time to do that. And since I'm trying to teach you guys to rely on yourselves to be able to draw, then that's another thing against me making tracing elements. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with tracing. Sometimes it's the best way to do it. But I think that, like anything, including gridding, if we rely on it too heavily and don't rely on ourselves, then we can stagnate and, potentially never grow beyond that. And I don't want that for you, and I don't want it for me. So I know my lines are kind of getting confusing here, but we'll clean that up. So don't worry about it right now, as long as you can still kind of tell where you're going. Be really cautious with your mushrooms. Make sure that your stem isn't coming like out the side of a mushroom. So one way I do that is by starting a line from the very top of the mushroom straight down the center. That's how I make sure that the stem is coming out of the center of the mushroom, not off to the side all weird like. And then I draw the stem around that center line. Okay, now I'm going to take slightly damp brush and I'm going to start just kind of erasing these lines that I don't need. So I don't need that center line anymore. I don't need any of those anymore. And that's coming off pretty easy. Good. I was a little worried about that. I don't need any of those lines. Pay special attention to your mushrooms. Which mushroom is in front? Make that decision. Don't let that get confusing. So I'm going to delete the line from this mushroom here because this one is in front. Just erasing any lines that are confusing for me. That mushroom is behind this one all the way. All the way. And it doesn't matter which one you say is behind or which one you say is in front. Just be consistent with it. Make sure that it makes sense to you. We'll put this one slightly in front. In fact, I think I want to bring this one up a little so that it's a little bit more obviously behind that one. Okay. Very good. I think we are ready to start painting our mushrooms. Okay, I think I'm going to start with the red. There's kind of a purpley red across the top of these mushrooms. And to do that, I've wiped my palette off. And remember that when you just wipe it off with a paper towel, even though they're staining, it doesn't really affect your paint. So I'm going to start with this ultramarine, a little bit of medium. Ultramarine, this is my number 8, a little bit of alizarin crimson. Just kind of looking for a warm violet, so I'm going to lean it ever so slightly on the alizarin side. A little bit of medium. I'm going to grab the tiniest point of white, really just to give this color some opacity. It's really super transparent, and so just a tiny, tiny poke of white is going to open it up to just be a little bit more opaque. I'm really sorry about that glare, you guys. My work area is so limited here at home that I can't just get rid of that, but I will do my best. All right, I'm just kind of creating the shape of my mushroom. And just look at where you see that color and just drop this down. And of course that color that I just made, it's not perfectly correct. It's not the absolute color that I need. Let's throw a little cerulean in there. But it's good enough for a start. It's a little cool. I'm going to throw a bit more alizarin in there. A little more alizarin. There we go. Much better. Now, when it comes to your mushrooms going outside of your shape, or maybe the shape of your mushrooms gets a little weird, don't worry about that so much right now, because, spoiler alert, we're not completely done with the background. So if my color gets a little outside of there, I'm not terribly worried about it. I'm going to stick with my number 8. I cleaned it off. I'm going to get some cerulean. Actually, let's wipe a little bit of that off. Let's use mostly ultramarine. Mostly. It's got a little cerulean in it. Maybe the tiniest poke of white, just to wake that color up a little, keep it a bit on the opaque, a little more on the opaque side. Ultramarine is very, very transparent. And this is going to be where kind of that brightest blue color is going to live. Don't get crazy with it. Don't get, you know, too overly specific. Pay attention to where it is on your mushrooms and just put it there. So I'm not going to go all the way to the bottom edge of this mushroom because I've got a bit of a glow from that inside color. Don't worry if your background shows through anything here. Don't worry about any of that. Now this one has some shadow on it. It's got just a bit of this color here and over here. So now hopefully you can see why I'm okay with my background being so dark. I know that when we are first painting the background, the temptation is there to make it nice and vivid, really bright, pretty colors. It's kind of hard to make it so dark and be okay with that. So I know I ran through this painting just real quick a couple days ago, and the first pass my background was so bright and colorful, and it made it really, really challenging to get these mushrooms to look like they were glowing. But one of the ways we're going to make these mushrooms glow is by giving them a really dark background to sit on. And that's part of what is going to help us create that glow. So don't be afraid of a dark background. If it's too bright, your mushrooms aren't going to glow. They're not going to seem as special. Your background is going to steal the show. And we don't want that. Let's do that same thing on the stems. So a little of my cerulean ultramarine mixture with just a little snap of white to make sure that it's not completely transparent and gets lost in the background. Now, don't worry about where the orange is just yet. I mean, kind of avoid it, but you don't want to worry about it too much. Another thing you want to do though is where we're getting close to that orange, you want to see I'm lightening my pressure very much. See how I'm not really laying a lot of paint down, but there's still a full load of paint on my brush. So right where that orange is going to be, just super lighten your pressure. We'll come back and deal with that later. But if you have a hard line like that, where your orange is going to be, it's going to be real hard to get that transition properly later. And I know that in our image, these stems are made up of different blues. We've got darker blues, brighter blues, greener, redder, all of that. Right now, we just want to get a base color on there. How high up should I go here? About right there. And again, don't worry if your color is still a little transparent. If you need a smaller brush for some of these smaller areas, go ahead and grab that. I'm just going to do this pretty rough and dirty right now. Nothing too tidy. I'm not worried about where the leafy bits at the bottom are going to be. I'm going to darken this a little bit because I don't want these two stems to get lost in each other. Keep any lines at the bottom of your mushrooms, here where the grass is going to be, keep those soft too, because again, once we come do the grasses, if you have a hard line, it's going to be really hard to mask that line. So let the very bottom, I mean, clearly we want the outer edge to be crisp, but at the bottom, just let that be soft. You can even just kind of scrub it out a little bit. That's going to be a lot easier to cover than if the bottom of your mushroom is a hard line like that. That's going to be real hard to cover. Okay, now we need to lay in the area where our orange is going to go. Don't jump straight to bright orange here. I am going to make it ever so slightly on the orange side. Just a little alizarin, a little Indian yellow. This is just kind of a placeholder color though. This is very little orange paint and white. See how pale I made that? Very, very pale. Maybe we'll pump it up just the tiniest bit more, but I really just want kind of a pale peach color. Little medium. Maybe I should be going down to a smaller brush. We'll see. Okay, I'm not going to worry about the edge of the mushrooms. Some of these mushrooms have this color on the edge of the cap. I'm not really going to worry about that. That's going to be easy to put in. Right now, I want to make sure that I have a place for that color right in here. So again, I'm filling that area in, and it's going to have a soft line at the bottom. Do not give it a hard line at the bottom. It's going to be really hard to take care of later. It's okay if you blend it down a little too far into the blue. The blue's not done. I'd rather have you blend it down too far than get a line that you're not going to be able to get rid of later. That's good enough. We're basically going to do that on all of these. Use whatever brush you're comfortable with. This is actually not real comfortable for me, but I've already got all this paint on the brush, so I am determined to see it through. Though when I come back to add the color later, I'm probably going to go to a different brush. That's really where the glow of our mushrooms is going to live, is in this little area right underneath the caps where that orange light is coming from. But I want that blue to seem like it's glowing too. And one of the ways we're going to do that is with the dark background, which we've already done. The other way we're going to make the blue of these mushrooms glow is by using phthalo blue. So that's why I had to add another blue to my palette today, even though I'm still using the two blues that I already had on it. But we'll talk about that more in depth when we get to the point where we're using the phthalo blue. All right. Okay, that's our placeholder color for the orange. Let's go ahead and keep working on our bright blue. I am going to go down to a smaller brush. I'm going to go to my number 6 and let's get cerulean. Pretty much just straight cerulean. Let's see how that works. I'm not really going to add any medium or any other color. It's just cerulean at this point. And we will start on our mushroom cap again. Now the reason we're using so many different colors of blue here is because we have different temperatures. So to give you just a really quick color theory explanation, ultramarine is a very red blue. It makes really good shadows, especially in blue. So it's going to work nicely for our shadow color, or the darkest blue on our mushrooms. I'm just kind of laying down a swath of color and then use the edge of my brush very lightly to break that line up. So ultramarine is going to be our shadow color. Cerulean is going to be kind of our mid-tone color. It's a little bit greener than ultramarine, which pulls it more into the side of light. So it's going to, this is where it's going to start looking like it's glowing, is that cerulean. However, cerulean is not very green. It's got a little more of a green color to it than ultramarine does. But to really make these mushrooms glow, we've got to get a good amount of green. And then, I don't want to make them green, but I want the blue to have a good green flavor to it. And neither ultramarine nor cerulean make very good bright greens. So that's why I had to bring in phthalo blue. All right, notice I'm not going all the way down to the bottom of my cap, because down here we've got a shadow and then we've got the light reflecting from underneath. So I'm just avoiding that. Not all of them are like that. Some of them don't have the light underneath, but this one and this one, I think those are really the only two where you can see the light glowing from underneath. This one has just a little bit of light over here, and a good amount of shadows being cast from this cap onto there. So we're going to leave that spot kind of dark. So anyway, the different temperatures in blues relate to color theory, because in color theory, as a general rule, not always, but as a general rule, warm colors come forward and help describe light, and cool colors recede and help describe shadow. So even though all these colors are blue, we have warm blues and cool blues. And the warmer we can make our blue, the more it's going to come forward and look like light. I think you'll see what I mean a little bit better once I get to the phthalo blue. You could also use phthalo turquoise instead of phthalo blue. I almost used phthalo turquoise because that's a color that I just really like, but it's also a color that a lot of people don't have, and so I just thought it would be easier if I just use kind of a standard color. I think just about everybody has phthalo blue. Notice I am scumbling this color up over top of that red ever so slightly. Don't keep them perfectly separate. It's going to look weird. Just like when we were doing the background and I said, you know, take it down into that previous color. It's the same thing here. This one doesn't have a whole ton of bright blue on it. Maybe I want to see a little bit more than what's in the image. Remember that when you're painting from a photo, you do not have to do it the way the photo is. The photo is not the boss, you're the boss. If you don't like something in the photo, then don't do it. If you think something else would look better, then do that. You are the boss, not the photo. Not me. I'm not the boss. If I'm doing something and you think it would look better another way, then do it that other way. We're getting there. All right, let's do a similar thing along the stalks of our mushrooms. I'm still just picking up cerulean. I'm not even picking up medium at this point, just cerulean. So look at your reference image, and I think you'll see where you've got a little bit of shadow and highlight. So like along the edge of this large one, it's definitely brighter down this edge and a little darker toward this edge. So just look for little things like that. This back one, it's brighter there and darker there. And we're gonna put this cerulean where we are seeing a bit of those highlighted areas. That's what we're doing here. So I'm gonna lay that down. And then up on the side of my brush, the edge, to just dust out that line. Remember, no hard lines. Hard lines are really hard to cover up later. Little scrubby texture is okay. I'm going to start blending this ever so slightly into this kind of peachy white color. Just take it up there a little bit. Can you see how if there were a hard line there, that would be really hard to cover up right now? But there's no hard line there, so I don't need to worry about it. Remember where your subject is. Which mushroom is really the primary mushroom that you want to be looking at? And it's this big one that I'm working on right now. So it should be the one that has the brightest colors. It should have, you know, the best amount of detail. This is our primary mushroom. Not this one, certainly not this one. So just be aware of that. If you're going to give one of these mushrooms a little something extra, make it this one. A little bit of a brighter edge on this bottom area. Just cerulean still. Nice crisp edge. I think that's good for a start there. Let's move on to our next one. Nice and bright. Along this side. We won't make it too bright down here because it's kind of getting into a, you know, kind of a recessed area where it might just be in a little bit more shadow. Same with over here. I don't want this area to get lost. Right now it's very, very dark, so I do want to put a little bit of my brighter color in there, but I don't want it to get too bright. This one in the front has quite a bit of shadow on it. I'm going to pull it forward just a little bit, but really as far as the stalks go, this is our darkest one. Don't be afraid to put your hands in paint. Get paint on your fingers, it washes off. If you're concerned about absorbing anything into your skin, just use some, like a blocking lotion, like gloves in a bottle, or you can wear gloves if you want to. This one has a good amount of light on it, particularly here in the middle. And I want to say along this edge. Blend it in there with that peachy color. And when I say blend, I just mean like scumble it over top. That peach color is dry. There's no actual blending going on. I mean, give it a visual blend. Now, I'm loaded up with cerulean. I'm going to grab a speck of phthalo blue. Remember that phthalo blue is very, very strong. So if you jump straight into it, you're going to get too much. So just get little bits at a time. And a little speck of white. We're just looking for a color that's a little tiny bit lighter than the cerulean, not a lot lighter, but that phthalo is going to make it ever so slightly greener. All right, I'm going to keep this color to the side where I want the mushroom to be the most glowy. And I feel like it's the most glowy, most of them over on this right-hand side. Still putting it on and then kind of breaking it up into these other blendy areas. I'm going to go back over that purpley color. We have a suggestion of this color kind of moving over to this area. See, now it's starting to look like it's glowing a little bit. It's just starting to. I think that's looking nice. Let's just give it a suggestion of this color over here on this edge. Let's keep going with that. Little phthalo, little white. Depending on what cerulean blue you're using, you may not need phthalo blue. If you're using a cerulean hue, that's for the most part, in most brands, I think it's phthalo blue with white. So check that out. The cerulean that I'm using is not hue, it's the traditional cerulean. So it's a little bit more grayed down. It's not a phthalo mixture. So yeah, if you're using cerulean hue, you're perfectly fine to just be using cerulean at this point with a hint of white in it to brighten it up, to lighten it a little bit. You don't need to add yellow or anything like that. I'm going to bring this color down a little bit farther simply because the tip of this mushroom in front of it is kind of getting lost in the shadow area. And I can change that later if I feel like that's too much, but for now, I'm going to stick with that. be patient and take your time here. I think that the vast majority of the time when I talk to people who are struggling, I think that it's because you're not taking all of the time that you need. We try to, and I definitely do it too. We try to rush through things. Oh, I don't want to do another layer, or I want to move on to the fun part, or whatever it is. So we don't take our time. But like I was talking before about, mindfulness, if you practice any kind of mindfulness, painting is a really good way to, practice what you learn in your mindfulness approach, I don't think that painting's worth doing if we're going to rush through it, trying to get from, one part to the next part. Just enjoy all of it. This one is pretty dark. This one doesn't have a lot. It definitely has some, otherwise it's just going to blend into the background. But I'm not going to go nutso with it. Kind of look at your mushrooms and rank them in importance. And those are the ones that get all of the attention, all of the bright colors. So I feel like these two are the most important. This one, then this one. Maybe this one next, this one, and then this one. That's kind of how I'm thinking about it. And that's important because if everything is competing for attention, then nothing is going to get the attention it deserves. So don't let them all compete with each other. Just decide who is most important and make them visually the most important. Again, here I'm just giving a suggestion, mostly along this right-hand side. And this one has a bit here. Still trying to reshape this one, so it looks a little strange. Good, I think we're getting there. It takes a few layers sometimes. I know that some artists, and maybe you're one of them, are really, confident at laying down your exact right color and everything in a single layer. I love to build. I just love to build the color. Let it build up on its own. Try and, pull some depth out of the different layers of colors. This is mostly cerulean. I didn't pick up any more phthalo, but I didn't clean off my brush either. And I added just a hint of white. These darker areas, I want to give my shadow something to shadow, if that makes any sense. So I know I just called this my darker area, and I'm adding a fairly light color. But I'm going to put my shadow color over top of it. A lot of times when working with colors, particularly blue, you have to consider how transparent it is. If you don't plan for the transparency of a color, things get frustrating when you try and lay that color on and it immediately disappears. I'm going to come back and add a little bit more of that purple color up at the top. And then there's one more thing that we're going to do to the background that's really going to help these mushrooms glow. Nice thick application there. And then tippy toe of the brush to spread it out. I'm not applying more paint. My brush has a ton of paint on it, so if I put too much pressure, I'm going to apply more paint. There we go. Maybe I should attach my microphone to the canvas and some ASMR stuff going on, huh? A little paintbrush scratchy sound. Let's work on our orange lights under the mushroom caps. And to do that, I'm gonna go to my number 2 filbert, if I can ever find it. So my number 2, just get a little bit of water on it. And I'm gonna get some alizarin, some Indian yellow. I don't want it to be too warm. I do have some areas in there that are pretty warm that lean quite a bit into the alizarin color. But for the most part, it's pretty pale, it's quite yellow. Let's get a little bit of white in there, which kind of turns it a little more peachy than you want. So after you add your white, just grab a little yellow. I just added some cad yellow. That's gonna help brighten it back up. There we go. I think a little more yellow, but I think that's a pretty good place to start. So let's start there. I'm gonna come in under the cap here and just start laying in this color. Pull that down, and again, no hard line. Leave some of that lighter color showing. That more white peachy color. Leave a bit of it showing at the base. And I think I will just define the bottom edge of this mushroom. But again, no hard line. I'm gonna put a shadow in there, so don't worry if that looks messy. Mine looks messy. As long as there's no hard line at the top here, it'll be easy to cover. Clearly we want a hard line at the base though, because that's the edge of the mushroom. And this one definitely has some. Don't take your line up over top of this mushroom. So we don't want to run this orange over top of that. Those are two different mushrooms. And we'll fill in our little glowy area here. I love painting with blues and teals. They're such pleasing colors to see, you know, kind of come out of the canvas. And I feel like they really help bring a sense of life that just so many other colors don't do. Let's warm this color up a little bit. Just grab some of that area that I hadn't mixed in, because this one is a little bit warmer right there. And it doesn't matter that this one is warmer right there, but you want to make sure that they're all just a little bit different. If one is warmer and one has less color and one has brighter color and one has more white or whatever, they all need to be ever so slightly different because they're all different. They're all different mushrooms. And if they all look exactly the same, it's going to be boring. In fact, I'm going to put a little extra yellow in this one and maybe a tiny bit of extra white. I'm just changing the color. And we'll do this little guy here. This one. Again, if you've gone outside of the shape of your mushrooms into your background, don't worry about that. We are going to come back and take care of that in just a few minutes. Maybe let's work on just kind of detailing some of those glowy bits. I just picked up more yellow. Plop that in here, right in the center. A little bit brighter. I applied the paint heavier, so it's much thicker. Still not worried about the edge of the mushroom, the edge of the cap. I'm just going to ignore it from here on out for a bit. Okay, let's go ahead and touch up. I'm going to stick with my number 2. I'm going to start touching up the kind of that purple on the top of the cap. So a little bit more white in there. I want to keep this purple a little closer to the alizarin side. So it's kind of grayish purple. See that? A little bit of white just helps open that color up. We don't need to fill in this whole shape. Don't lose all of that first purple color. It's not a big solid color. Scumble a hint of it down into here. And if I do accidentally lose too much of that first purple color, I can add it back in. Okay, just kind of go along all of them here. My orange kind of got out of control and went over top of this one, so I'm just going to redefine that shape. Let's keep our number 2 here, and I am going to mix up alizarin and ultramarine again, but without white this time. Yeah, alizarin and ultramarine, yeah. It gives us a nice dark purple. Little medium. And we need to put our shadow in all of our mushrooms right here on the lip. Just as it curves down, it gives a bit of a shadow, and it's okay. You definitely want to layer it over top of this orange color. It's going to kind of gray it out and really help with that shadow look. Just remember to soften out your edges. Scumble it up onto your mushroom a bit. I have a little bit of a glare, so hopefully I'm not missing any hard lines, because if I move so I can see it perfectly, my head will be in your way. So right over top of that line, and then just scumble it out. Go ahead and take it up into your mushroom. Don't worry about losing too much of your glow on the lip of the mushroom, because remember, this is just a placeholder color. We're going to fix it up. It doesn't look like we want it to look just yet. You know, I'm going to add a hint of phthalo into this mixture. Phthalo and alizarin make a little bit of a darker color. This mushroom back here has a nice shadow on it. So I want to be able to get really dark, especially because I can see a bokeh light right there through it. So I'm going to apply that dark and heavy right on top of that bokeh light. As clearly our mushroom is not going to be see-through. And then softly blend that up. Make sure that you do check out my mailing list on my website. I think I mentioned that at the very beginning of this video, but if you sign up for my mailing list on my website, then I will email you very first my list of 101 ways that you can improve your painting immediately. And yes, it is a legit list of 101 ways that you can improve your painting, and it took me forever to come up with that list. And I'm really excited to share it with you guys. And I promise I don't send out a ton of emails, so I'm not going to be, bombarding you every day with emails about this and that and 45 emails in a row. And I only send out emails when I have something important to say. I'm trying to get back in the habit of emailing when I have a video. And, if I have workshops or brush sales or anything like that, then I'll email you there about that too. But I don't send out a ton. I'm just reviewing that shadow to see how it looks. I think it's okay, except I feel like I want to bring it up a little bit more to this side. Not too bad. Once we get the shadow on, really the rest of the painting is just building, darkening this, brightening that. We have everything on here that we need on here now. This cap is pretty dark. There's a slight, now that I really look at it, there's a slight reflection on the bottom edge, but I can do that in a single brush stroke later. I'm not worried about it right now. And our little guy here. This little guy has a lot of shadows, so I might give him a good bit. He's kind of hiding underneath everybody else. Just deepen my shadow right here a bit. And then let's work on our brightness again. Kind of getting this blue to glow. We got a good start, but it's not glowing just yet. Not the way I want it to anyway, but we're close. Let's go back to our stalks. So I'm going to get some of the cerulean. There's a little bit of white in there. I'm still using my number 2. I'm going to get some phthalo. Good bit of phthalo. And some white. Now we're really going to see how the very slight flavor of green in that phthalo, how that's going to make everything really glowy. I'm going to keep this in our brightest area. As we're going here, where we're actually building the glow, you can apply your paint a little bit heavier. So when we very first start, we're doing it quite thin, and I'm doing it kind of thin here to blend it out, but in the areas where I want it to be nice and bright, that's a pretty full layer of paint there. It's thick. I'm not going to be afraid to get up here into this light, but I am going to lighten my pressure. And lightly scumble it in. It's going to turn a little bit green, but you know what? It's a yellow light reflecting on a blue mushroom. Of course there's going to be a hint of green in there. There always comes a point in a painting where you kind of feel like you've lost it, where you're like, well, this was going okay, but now this looks garbage, and I don't know how I'm gonna get that back, or I feel like I've messed it up. And I find that it typically comes when you are nearing your last couple layers, because it starts looking good and you think, oh, this is almost there, it just needs to be brighter. So then you get that brighter paint and you start putting it on and you're like, oh, good grief, that looks too bright or too whatever, and so you feel like you've ruined it. But don't let that take you over. You might be there right now thinking that you've totally destroyed it, but I promise you haven't. I wanted to test and see how much of that color I'd picked up. I didn't want to get it too bright right in here. Scumble that up a little bit. Make sure you stand back, stand away from it and look. Standing up next to it, you might think, oh, this looks horrible. Then you stand back and you're like, oh, that actually looks good. And vice versa. You might be looking at it up close and thinking, heck, yes. And then you stand back and you're like, oh, oops. So make sure you get away from it a little bit here and there. I know that I need to glaze in some shadow here. So all I'm doing with this color is just kind of giving some texture. Kind of like I said on the cap, I'm going to give the shadow something to shadow. Look over here, that's so dark. So I'm just lightly scumbling some of that lighter color in there where I'm going to apply my shadow. If I put my shadow color over that as it was, you wouldn't see any of that. You can't have shadow without light, and vice versa. I get asked a lot why I put white highlights on it and I can't even see it. How do I make my white brighter? I've actually been asked, how do I make my white brighter? And I understand that question. I'm not making fun of that question. I have definitely in my day gotten to the point where I'm like, oh, my white isn't bright enough. I don't know how that's possible. If your white isn't bright enough, chances are your shadows aren't dark enough. That's what's really going on. That's looking pretty dang good. I'm really happy with how this is looking so far. It's not done, but I don't think it's too far off. Just kind of thickening up, making sure I don't have lines, making sure my brightest color is where I want it. So, for example, about your darks aren't dark enough. My background is not dark enough in some places. But I did that on purpose because I knew that I needed to be able to come back and touch up the background. So I'm not worried about the background. Some areas are perfect the way they are. Some of them are still too bright. And let's just brighten this up a little bit. I want this one to be a bit on the darker side, but that doesn't mean that I want it to be completely dark. I just don't want it to have as much brightness. Oh, I forgot about the little guy. Little guy's pretty light. We'll just suggest some highlight here. We'll leave the little guy pretty dark. I'm going to actually widen it out just a bit at the base here. Just a little bit. There we go. And let's just pop some of that brighter color. The cerulean, the phthalo, with a little extra white in it. Not really using any matte medium at this point anymore. Because the matte medium, it makes the colors a bit more transparent. And I'm building thickness and opacity right now, so don't want to make it transparent. Once I'm done with all of these highlights, we'll come back with our shadow, and then I think we'll be ready to move into finishing up the orange. I know this has been kind of a long road. It feels like it's been a long road for me anyway, because with all the drying time and, you know, just maintaining my camera and my audio recording and everything, recording a video takes a lot longer than what you see in the end. So what might end up being an hour-and-a-half video, it could potentially take me a couple of days to record, and then at that point it feels super long. So that's kind of where I am right now. Just lightly scumbling it ever so slightly over that edge of shadow. We need a transition from shadow into light. So don't keep them perfectly separate. It's going to look weird. Heavy brush stroke. Just break it up a little. It's okay if there's a little bit of texture from your, your brush stroke texture. Oh, that's much more glowy than it was. Let's do this one last bit of glowiness, and then we'll move on. I'm going to go just a little bit lighter, just a little bit lighter. I might also grab, I'm going to be really gutsy here, I'm going to grab the tiniest amount of cad yellow that I possibly can. I don't even know if you can see that. It's like a pinpoint of yellow. Trying not to go too crazy with the difference here. I'm going to be very selective with where this color goes. Super, super selective. I don't want this color to read as green. I'm just trying to warm it ever so slightly. That's why the tiny, tiny pinpoint of yellow. If you get heavy-handed with it and that yellow turns it green, I think you'll be disappointed. Oh, Mr. Moon woke up. Yep, I am just about done with this blue. This is still that blue that I ever so slightly added yellow to. Okay, we're really gonna punch those highlights in the mushrooms by knocking in our shadows. So a little more ultramarine. I'm just gonna pull a little bit of this purpley color into there, but it's mostly ultramarine. And I am gonna use some matte medium, just a little bit. We don't want it too thick. Really look and see, where do I see that darker blue? And we're just gonna gently glaze. So if you need to let that last color dry a bit before this, please do. See, I'm not covering it, it's not going away, it's just cooling it off, which makes it feel like a shadow. And I can even do some of that up here in this purple. We actually have quite a bit of that in here. By keeping our highlight color special, don't paint the entire mushroom that color. It will help with the glow feeling. For those of you wondering where Mr. Moon was, there he is. He's been so quiet today. I was wondering if he accidentally got locked in the back bedroom or something. Nope. All right, let's shade our stems a little bit. And we are really just about done with this painting. Just a little bit of detail work is it after this. Nice and dark in here. You know, I don't know that I want to do all of those grasses and all of that greenery at the bottom. I kind of like the idea that maybe there's just a little bit of a glow reflecting on the ground beneath them. Also because the greenery in our reference image is so detailed. You know, there's lots of little nubs and bits, and you know, I think that all of that detail, we could get lost in that, and then that's gonna take importance over our mushrooms, we're going to be looking at all of that detail. And I don't want to do that. I want the mushrooms to be important, not the grass that they're sitting on top of. So I think I'm going to do something a little bit different. Oh, I forgot the edge of our little mushroom here. I keep forgetting about this poor little guy. Go back to our number 2 and work on our glowy bits a little bit more. I'm going to add more white into this yellow area. Nice and opaque, nice and light, very, very warm. Kind of lost a little bit of that lighter area that I wanted to maintain. So I'm kind of adding some of that back in. Mostly here where the yellow and the blue meet. This one's pretty good. I'm just going to give it a flavor of this lighter color. Doesn't need a lot, I think. I'm going to get some more yellow, just mix it in with what's on my brush. Maybe I'll really warm that yellow up with a little bit of Indian yellow. You want to keep the most vivid color kind of right there, just under the cap. By vivid, I mean, you know, the most intensely warm color. Just about there. I'm actually going to wipe some of this off. I just have too much paint and definitely too much white. I'm going to poke right into my yellow, just get it smoothly on my brush. This is just pure cad yellow in a very small bit and just broken up. They do not all need that color, just where you really want to say this one is important. So mostly I'm just going to do it on these two. Maybe just a suggestion here, because this was my third most important mushroom. I think that's it on those. Actually, before I do the edges, let's do the background. So I'm going to go back to my number 8. I'm going to get some phthalo blue and some alizarin. They make a very, very dark color. Very dark. Just a little bit of medium. Not a lot of medium. Now I'm going to cut around the edge of my mushrooms in places. I can clean up any edges that got away from me. I can reshape anything. Again, we don't want those hard lines. So cut around it. And then dust out the hard line. Don't try to preserve any bokeh light that might happen to be right there, because it'll look weird if everything around it is dark, but then you've saved this one bokeh light. The bokeh lights are not the important part of this painting. The mushrooms are. I'm not going to go all the way around. Just kind of in places. If you look at our reference image, there's definitely this area around them that's very, very dark. So that's kind of what I'm doing here. Just scumble it out a bit. Let's get some right in here, especially because this edge got weird. Some pencil lines that are still showing. We're going to make it nice and dark in this whole little triangle, because that's where our two focal mushrooms meet. So we want that space to be nice and dark so that the mushrooms can be the center of attention. Definitely over here, because this is our focus mushroom. Nice and dark. That's going to really make our glowy colors glow even more. So that's what I was saying about if your lights aren't light enough, then it's because your darks aren't dark enough. We'll do a little bit more over here. Then we'll do something just super quick with the ground. Just put this color wherever you need to send your mushrooms off of the background. Make them really important. I think I will continue it right here, but then I think I'm pretty much done. I don't think I need a lot more than that. And once this dries, you won't be able to see these weird lines that you can see right now from my brushwork. Okay. Let's do something just quick and easy with the ground here. I'm actually going to stick with this dark color, the phthalo alizarin mixture. And I'm going to grab a little cerulean to lighten it. I'm not going to use white to lighten it, at least not just yet, maybe in a bit. And I'm just going to kind of scrub this in. Use the edge of your brush. I'm not covering everything. I'm not worried about covering everything. I'm just going to make it look like it's sitting on something that's kind of catching the glow of some of these colors. If you really want to get in there and do all of those grasses, go for it. We all make decisions, you know, based on what we think looks right and what we want to see. And I definitely just think that the grass is too much for me. A little bit of that lighter color. Once you're done with this lighter color and it's dry, if it's too much anywhere, just glaze over it with some of your darker color again. Particularly at the edges, I feel like it needs to be a little dark on these sides, and it can be a little bit lighter in the center. Maybe we can even throw a hint of yellow in there because it's definitely catching a bit of reflection from the lights coming out of the mushrooms. All right, this is the very last part, I promise. I'm gonna use my number 3 round, and I'm gonna get my bright color. We're just gonna touch up the highlights on those edges of a couple of mushrooms, and then we're done. So we're gonna come in here, nice, crisp, bright edge. Just soften that line. That's really about it. Not gonna go much crazier with it than that. Doesn't even have to cover the entire edge. And just because there's only this reflection on the edge of a couple of them in the image, that doesn't mean you can't put it on more, especially if you feel like one of the edges of a mushroom is just really lost. You can give it a little suggestion of a highlight. And we'll give this one just a tiny bit. And maybe this one too, because he's kind of getting lost. And maybe a little bit over here. And I think that's good. I'm gonna sign it with my glowy color. And I'm gonna call it done. Thank you so much for watching and painting along with me today, everyone. And thank you, as always, to my amazing sponsor, Fredrix, for providing the canvas that I used today. Make sure that you check out the video description below for a link to where you can get yours as well. And also, don't forget to sign up for my mailing list on my website, and I will immediately email you my list of 101 ways that you can immediately improve your painting skills. Thank you again for watching, everyone, and I hope to see you next time.